Well, good afternoon. It's good to be with y'all today. This is my annual teaching time, so I get to do this once a year when the pastor, in July when the pastor says, "Hey, here's some open dates. Who would like to take one?" And so the staff rush and say, "This is the one I want." So I'm excited to be able to close out the summer Bible study today with us, and we're going to be talking about 2nd and 3rd John. But before we do, we've had a long summer, a good summer, a busy summer in engagement ministries with just trips, and Luke went to the Baptist World Alliance, and we've just been trying to figure out what does this look like for next year. We've got our residency program that's starting next week. So we have a first resident that's piloting the year with us as a global resident. That will be coming on. Her name's Jalen Harris, and so I'm really excited about that. So our team's getting ready for what that means and just the newness of life starting into the fall. But I heard that y'all like pictures of families. Okay, so I was just on a vacation, and I'm going to have Jordan put our family picture up there. This is my husband, Jason. He travels a lot, and so he's not here a lot of the time. But that's Harrison, my 13-year-old son, who's going into 8th grade. He'll be at Gunn Junior High. He's about as tall as me. Probably in 2 more weeks he will be taller. So we're just kind of battling it out at this moment. But he is just a true sweetheart. We're going cave tubing. So if you ever want to do something adventurous, cave tubing, it's like very slow, but it's just wonderful. You've got a headlamp on, and you're going through these 9-mile wide cave systems in Central America. It was a highlight of our vacation, and so anyway, but you will see Harrison walking around campus. He likes to help in the media team, so sometimes he's holding one of those cameras in one of the services, and I think he's now going to be part of Chi Alpha, which is a big thing for him because he doesn't like to get up and sing, but he sings all the time at home. And so when he was on the all-access mission trip to the border with Miss Emily and Miss Christy and Mr. Aaron and Brock, he started singing, humming and singing by himself, and Miss Christy was like, "Where did you get that voice? What are you doing?" And so he's like, "I guess I have to be in Chi Alpha now." So he is joining Chi Alpha, which is a great thing. But he loves tennis, and this week he is venturing into golf camp, and so maybe we have a golfer as well. Jason and I don't golf. We are basketball people, but that's not what Harris's forte is. So, it takes a lot of trial and error trying to figure out what do kids, how the Lord has gifted them, and how do we shepherd them along. So anyway, I just love him. He's a sweetheart. So thank you for letting me share my family with you. Okay, so are y'all ready? I have 2nd and 3rd John, and I did not get y'all a printout. I'm so sorry. I heard, though, that that's like a regular thing this summer. Nobody's giving you printouts. So I'm just right along with everybody else. But that will change when Dr. Wiles is back up here with y'all. But I do have a lot of pages of notes. I'll say that. 16, in fact. So I really enjoyed this study, and we'll dive deep into it as well. But really, my take on this is more from an ecclesiology standpoint. I really want us to understand what the writers are trying to portray to us about the health of a church internally and what this means. And so I just loved my time. So let's just dive in. So 2nd and 3rd John, they are really the 2 shortest books in the New Testament. Okay, each actually would fit on a single sheet of papyrus. And I don't know if you have your Bibles, but mine is like, you see, it's just like very short right here. And it's fascinating. And so I'm like, why did our church fathers who put everything in the canon decide to put these letters here? So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. But the length of the length of these letters is really just much like the first century letters, how they were written. They are short, and sometimes they're easily overlooked. But I want us to really dig deep into the context because these are very rich letters. And these letters give us something very valuable to us. They allow us to look inside the everyday life of the early church, and there's a lot of truths for us to continue to utilize today. So, the kinds of questions that these letters are answering is, who should we trust? Who should we support? Who should we send? Who should we receive? And these weren't just first century questions. They were back then when they were written, but these are questions that we still ask today as a church, so they're a great guidance for us. Now, these letters were written by the elder. Tradition and majority view within the Orthodox Christianity, identifies him as Apostle John. There's some other scholars and views that say, it's just John the elder, but not Apostle John. But either way, regardless of really who wrote it, the early church received these letters as apostolic, and they preserved them in the canon and recognized that they carried instruction for the church at large. Due to how I'm going to be talking about things, I'm just going to use John as the writer, okay? It's just what I'm going to do today, but know that is, up for debate. So also ecclesiology, I use that word. When we hear the word ecclesiology, we often think about the church structure, like elders, deacons, church government, polity, and those are definitely important in church structure, but I want us to also understand that there's a much larger question when we're talking about ecclesiology. It's what kind of community does Jesus intend his church to become? Okay? And so Acts shows us that the church was born and how it was born. Ephesians explains what the church is, and then 2nd and 3rd John shows us how the church is meant to live. And so we'll walk through that. Let me see here. Okay, so these two letters, we're going to look at these two letters as really like case studies, two case studies in the internal life of the church, answering this like central question: what kind of church faithfully preserves and advances the gospel? And John answers that questions with two different angles, okay? 2nd John teaches the church whom it must not endorse, okay? And then 3rd John teaches the church whom it should joyfully support. And every church in every generation still asks those same questions around its influence, its resources, its reputation, and its people. So let's read. I'm going to read both of these letters together before we dive deeper, because these letters were meant to be read, maybe heard together, but in one sitting. So we're just going to do that for both 2nd John and 3rd John, and I'll read this out loud. So 2nd John, the elder, to the lady chosen by God and to her children, whom I love in the truth, and not I only, but also all who know the truth, because of the truth which lives in us and will be with us forever. Grace, mercy, and peace from God the Father and from Jesus Christ, the Father's Son, will be with us in truth and love. It has given me great joy to find some of your children walking in the truth, just as the Father commanded us. And now, dear lady, I am not writing you a new commandment, but one we have had from the beginning. I ask that we love one another, and this is love, that we walk in obedience to his commands. And as you have heard from the beginning, his command is that you walk in love. Now, I say this because many deceivers who do not know Jesus Christ as coming in the flesh have gone out into the world. And any such person is the deceiver and the Antichrist. Watch out that you do not lose what we have worked for, but that you may be rewarded fully. And anyone who runs ahead and does not continue in the teaching of Christ does not have God. So whoever continues in the teaching has both the Father and the Son. If anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching, do not take them into your house or welcome them. Anyone who welcomes them shares in their wicked work. I have much to write to you, but I do not want to use paper and ink. Instead, I hope to visit you and talk with you face to face so that our joy may be complete. The children of your sister, who is chosen by God, send their greetings. Let's move to 3 John. The elder, to my dear friend Gaius, whom I love in the truth. Dear friend, I pray that you may enjoy good health and that all may go well with you, even as your soul is getting along well. It gave me great joy when some believers came and testified about your faithfulness to the truth, telling how you continue to walk in it. I have no greater joy than to hear that my children are walking in the truth. Dear friend, you are faithful in what you are doing for the brothers and sisters, even though they are strangers to you. They have told the church about your love. Please send them on their way in a manner that honors God. It was for the sake of the name that we went out, receiving no help from the pagans. We ought, therefore, to show hospitality to such people so that we may work together for the truth. I wrote to the church, but Diotrephes, who loves to be first, will not welcome us. So when I come, I will call attention to what he is doing, spreading malicious nonsense about us. Not satisfied with that, he even refuses to welcome other believers. He also stops those who want to do so and puts them out of the church. Dear friend, do not imitate what is evil, but what is good. And anyone who does what is good is from God. Anyone who does what is evil has not seen God. Demetrius is well spoken of by everyone, even by the truth itself. And we all speak well of him, and you know that our testimony is true. I have much to write to you, but I do not want to do so with pen and ink. I hope to see you soon, and we will talk face to face. Peace to you. The friends here send their greetings. Greet the friends there by name. Okay, so let's unpack these. Let's enter into this world. Again, I'm going to use John as just the talking point of the writer. So John is writing near the end of the 1st century. So here's the historical context. It's probably somewhere between 85 to 95 AD. And most scholars believe this writing is from around Ephesus to the churches scattered throughout Asia Minor. We don't know really how many churches there were in Asia Minor, but there were multiple. And the apostles are reaching the end of their life. John is getting old. There's a few have already passed away as well and been martyred. And so here's something key. The New Testament has not yet been collected into the canon that we know today, okay? So these are just letters passing through. Now, the church is growing and also facing new challenges, and the apostles are no longer able to personally observe every congregation. So churches are learning how to preserve the gospel while continuing to expand its witness. And, the church looked very different than it does today. There's no church buildings. There's no seminaries, no mission agencies, and no reliable hotels. So churches met in homes. And they depended on networks of believers to care for one another and to carry the gospel from city to city. Okay, so this brings us to the most important part of the letters, hospitality. So today, when we think about that word, we think about inviting someone over for dinner or making them feel welcome. However, hospitality, even though it includes those things, in the 1st century church, it meant much more. When a traveling Christian teacher arrived in a town, a believing family would often welcome them into their home. They would provide the food. They would lodge them. They would entertain them. They would financially support them before sending them to the next church. So they would give money to them to be able to go on their way to whatever it took to the next town or to the next church. So hospitality became one of the church's primary means of participating in the mission of God. But hospitality also communicated endorsement. Okay? To receive a traveling teacher into your home was to publicly say, we recognize that this person is a faithful representative of Christ, and we stand behind their teachings and their ministry. So hospitality gave teacher credibility. It gave them access to the church. It gave them influence. And once we understand that part about hospitality and then look to 2 John and 3 John and start reading it from that lens, you're going to have a better understanding about the tensions between these letters and how all of that comes into focus. So, 2 questions that John is writing about for every church, or these churches. How do we keep from endorsing false teachers, which is 2 John? 3 John is, how do we faithfully support true teachers? So, key thing to remember, hospitality was the church's missionary infrastructure. It's a good thing for us to learn if we're not doing that today. So, why are these in the canon before we dive into them? You know, when you look at them, they're personal letters. They're a letter written to a church or written to an individual. So why would the early church preserve them? That was just something I wanted to seek out. I don't know if you ask those questions, but I do. And so I wanted to understand. So unlike many of the New Testament letters, 2nd and 3rd John has a limited audience, and so these letters circulated more slowly than some of the other New Testament writings. They were also among the last books to be universally recognized throughout the church. The early Christians didn't simply accept, every document that claimed apostolic authority. They had to be very careful. They had to think through these questions. Was it written by the apostle or someone closely connected to the apostles? Did it faithfully preserve the teaching handed down by Jesus? And was it recognized and received across the churches? So after a while of circulation, these letters stood the test of time. Their theology is completely consistent with the Gospel of John and 1 John and the broader apostolic witness. And the early church leaders, such as Irenaeus, quoted these actually 2 John as he quoted them as authoritative, showing that these letters had already moved from being a private correspondence to shaping doctrine in the life of the wider church there. So another interesting piece of evidence comes from the Didache, an early Christian church manual written near the end of the 1st century or the beginning of the 2nd. And although the Didache was never recognized as scripture, it was basically a manual that wrestled with many of these same issues addressed in 2nd and 3rd John. Traveling teachers, hospitality, discernment, church leadership. So we need to understand that what these 2 letters are focused on are not isolated problems to one church. They have become questions that multiple churches were beginning to face. So church fathers preserved these letters, recognizing that they were answering these questions about trust, support, who speaks for Christ, who carries the gospel. And so with that, let us begin with the case study in church life. Let's look at 2 John, okay? Now, 2 John's, the writer's concern for 2 John isn't simply the fact that false teachers exist. Jesus warned they would come. Paul warned they would come. Peter warned they would come. John's concern is that the faithful church might unknowingly help spread their message because of hospitality, okay? So verses 1 through 6, The letter opens simply, the elder to the elect lady and her children. So who is this elect lady? Who are these children? Most scholars say that that's really a term of the local church, referring to its members. It can also be literal. There's just some debate about that. Is it a literal woman and her children, or a congregation that she oversees? There's just debate around that. But however we want to think about that, I want us to pass over that and understand that the message that he's communicating here is the same. He's writing to a community of believers. That's what we need to take away from that. Before John says anything about false teachers, he starts to spend the 6 verses laying a theological foundation. So he's prepping the argument. He's saying, let's look at truth. You need to understand what the truth is first. And that's important, because if he didn't say that at the beginning, then he started out with, dear friends, dear church, don't receive these teachers. People might conclude that John was harsh or unloving. He was against hospitality, and that's not what he's saying. He is really wanting to explain why the church must exercise discernment. And so the logic of the letter goes with truth defines love before love practices discernment. And so what is that truth? What is that noise? Oh, okay. Okay. So, screaming children. Okay, they're having children that are having fun. For those on the live feed, they're upstairs in our gym having a lot of fun. So, okay. So John, he's really trying to protect the truth, and so he's defining Christian love before asking the church to practice Christian discernment. Let me see where I'm at here. Okay. Now, if you look in verses 1 through 6, kind of highlight, it'd be interesting if you want to circle or just count how often the word truth appears in these verses. Truth isn't simply something Christians believe. It's actually the environment in which they live. John speaks of loving in the truth, walking in the truth, and abiding in the truth. And then he defines love in verse 6 as this is love, that we walk according to his commandments. Okay. For John, love is never separated from obedience. Love is more than affection. Today our definition of love is so shallow. But it has more than good intentions and more than tolerance. Love is obedience given in a relational shape as we're walking, as we're abiding, as we're loving, but what? In truth. So he's saying, here's the truth. Now he's laid that foundation before he talks about the threat facing the church in verses 7 through 9. So in verses 7 through 9, he explains why he's really writing this letter. Many deceivers have gone out into the world. So who are these deceivers? Anybody? Yeah. John identifies them as those that are denying that Jesus Christ came in the flesh. So, a traveling teacher comes in and starts teaching, but denying that Jesus came in the flesh. What should the church do? You should not show hospitality to them, because you're giving them access to inwardly into the church. Okay? The rejection of the incarnation is huge. So by the end of the first century, churches around Ephesus were increasingly encountering teachers influenced by the Greek philosophy. And I think y'all talked a little bit about this through 1 John, but Many believed the physical world was inferior or perhaps even evil. If matter was corrupt, they reasoned that God could not truly be human. And so, you have this thought pattern and process. But John is saying, no, go back. The Gospel of John begins, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. First John opens by emphasizing what the apostles had heard, seen, and touched concerning Jesus Christ. And John keeps returning back to that same truth over and over, because why does the incarnation matter? Well, it matters because if Jesus was not truly human, then he truly didn't suffer and he truly didn't die, and atonement loses its meaning, and then the gospel unravels. And so the incarnation is a foundational truth that the churches have to understand. And so the Christian faith rests on that confession. And so this is why John is so strongly adamant, or the writers in the Johannine communities were so adamant for the churches there to understand. To deny Christ's true humanity is to abandon the apostolic gospel itself. So, what's interesting, though, if you take a step back out of these two letters and you start thinking through these same type of letters, the Gospel of John proclaims who Jesus is. First John defends the truth about Jesus. Second John tells the church not to endorse those who deny that truth. And third John gives personal examples of people living that truth. So it's an interesting way to see some of those letters. But everything the church believes stands and falls on the person of Jesus Christ. And it's still true today. So verses 10 through 13, we get into the hospitality, where hospitality requires discernment. John writes, if anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching, do not receive him into your house or welcome him. Now, that may sound harsh if you don't understand the context. That's why context is king, right? Okay. Until we remember the world these churches lived in, hospitality wasn't simply kindness for teachers. Hospitality was kindness of welcoming the strangers outwardly, those that were unbelievers. But when you're talking about believers, hospitality being extended to them as teachers, it was endorsement. So when the church welcomed a traveling teacher, remember, they were saying, we know this person, we trust this person, we stand behind what they said. It gave credibility, influence, and access. So that's how we need to be reading 2 John. John is not telling believers to refuse kindness to unbelievers. New Testament consistently tells us as Christians to love our neighbors, welcome strangers, and care for those outside of the faith. Okay? That is our witness. Here, John's concern is much more narrower. He's warning the church not to use its relationships, reputation, and resources to advance a distorted gospel. You don't want to put someone in a teaching position that is denying Christ was fully God and fully man, and then sending them on their way to another church to do the same thing. If you do that, you are distorting the gospel. So that was the concern. And back to the Didache. Has anybody heard of the Didache? Okay, some of you. I hadn't. So I did a little deep dive. I read through it. You can read through it in a sitting. So within a generation, an early Christian document known as the Didache addressed the very same issue. It served as a practical handbook for many churches. And I know I said this earlier, but here's a little more deep dive. It instructed believers to welcome the traveling teachers, but also to examine both their doctrine and their character. And those who sought personal gain or departed from the apostolic faith were not to receive the church's endorsement. So Christian hospitality, we need to take away, Christian hospitality is generous outwardly. To the unbeliever, we're generous. But we're also discerning when it comes to coming in and teaching. It welcomes people, but it doesn't endorse every message. It has to be discerned. So, and that still applies today. You know, we don't often host traveling teachers in our homes. You know, sometimes we do, but it's a different day. The church has grown and is bigger. But we do invite guest speakers. You know, we do recommend books, share podcasts, partner with ministries. We support organizations and sent workers, you know. But every one of those decisions requires discernment. And when we do that, it also communicates trust in what they're saying. Okay? Healthy churches are generous enough to advance the gospel and discerning enough to protect it. Okay, let's go now on to 3 John. 3 John is about advancing the gospel through partnership. Are y'all with me? I know it's like one, but I still got a little ways to go. Y'all good? Okay. All right. So if 2 John teaches the church not to endorse the wrong people, 3 John teaches the church to faithfully support the right ones. Okay. So let's view it from the opposite side. This letter is it's a personalized letter to a man named Gaius. We don't really know much about him, but really that's not the point about this. So John isn't trying to make Gaius famous. He's actually just making him an example. Okay. The question driving this letter is different from that first one. How does a church actively participate in God's mission? This is how you do it. John answers that question with 3 examples. There's a person to imitate, there's one to avoid, and there's one to trust. So Gaius, verses 1 through 8, is a model of faithfulness. He begins with that encouragement. He praises Gaius not for his preaching, not for his church planting, not for leadership or public ministry. He actually commends Gaius because he faithfully supported those who were carrying the gospel with hospitality. He welcomed traveling workers and he cared for them and he sent them on in a manner worthy of God. So Gaius understood something that we need to learn from 2 John. Remember, hospitality isn't just simply kindness, it's endorsement. And he knew how to do that. So he's a good example of that. So he would discern these workers faithfully, proclaiming Christ. And then if he saw that their theology or orthodoxy was grounded in apostolic teaching, then he partnered with them. He used his home, his resources, his influence to advance the gospel. So that was a great example. Verse 8, therefore we ought to support such people so that we may be fellow workers for the truth. Now, John doesn't say only those teachers, traveling teachers, those missionaries participate in God's mission. He doesn't say only the pastors, the overseers, the presbyters, or the apostles are doing God's work. Instead, in verse 8, he says that those who faithfully support gospel workers become fellow workers themselves. That's something for us to learn. We're all part of God's mission. We all take a part in this partnership. As a church, we talk about, some go and others are called to send. Some preach, some provide. Some cross cultures and others make it possible. However, we all do this together as one. It's not an individualistic mindset. This is something in community that we do. So, something we can take away from this is that faithfulness, especially, coming from engagement side of the staff structure, faithfulness isn't measured only by where we go, it's actually measured by how faithfully we help others go. And that's where you see in this beautiful example of partnership in the gospel. Now, here's the warning, verses 9 and 10. Diotrephes. Poor guy. What does he say? Diotrephes can actually show us that how to destroy a church from within. It's really a clear portrait of unhealthy leadership. So, what's the diagnosis from John or the elder? He loves to be first. That's the diagnosis. And what are the symptoms of that? He describes them. Because he loves to be first, he rejects apostolic authority. He spreads malicious accusation. He refuses faithful gospel workers. He prevents others from welcoming them. And he even removes those who disagree with him from the church. Now, key point here. He doesn't talk about Diotrephes as accusing him for false doctrine. But his problem is pride. So he had the doctrine, but it was all about him. Instead of understanding to steward Christ's church for Christ, and Christ is head of the church, he acts as though it belongs to him. He's the gatekeeper. And the results are devastating for this church. Faithful workers rejected. The mission slows. So, things for us to understand between these two letters, these connection points. 2 John warns that false teachers can hinder the gospel. But 3 John warns us that prideful leaders in the church can also hinder the gospel. So, one threat comes from outside the church. The other rises from within. And John reminds us that orthodoxy alone is not enough. And a church may have excellent doctrine and still fail to participate in God's mission if its leaders seek control more than service. And so healthy churches need both sound doctrine and humble leadership. Truth and character belong together. Okay, verses 11 through 12. I'll hurry up here. If Gaius models faithful partnership and Diotrephes warns against pride, then Demetrius demonstrates what a trustworthy Christian reputation looks like. John writes, Demetrius has received what? 1, a good testimony for everyone. 2, from the truth itself and from us. Threefold affirmation. Everyone speaks well of him. His life agrees with the truth he proclaims, and John himself confirms his faithfulness. And so for John's readers, for the readers of this letter, this would have carried tremendous weight just from the Jewish tradition. The Old Testament, the important matters, they like to establish it in 2 or 3 witnesses, and so he uses that pattern about multiple witnesses to honor and to commend Demetrius' character. And so you see that. But at the end of the letter, John has given the church 3 living examples. Be like Gaius. Support faithful workers. How, though? With discernment. Okay? Do not be Diotrephes. Reject the pride and desire for prominence, and trust people like Demetrius. Look for lives that consistently reflect the truth they proclaim. So, when you put these letters together, and side by side, you can see one maybe sounds restrictive because you're saying don't receive certain teachers, and the other one can sound welcoming, but John doesn't contradict himself, or the elder doesn't contradict himself in here. He's teaching the church how to exercise discernment And so the ecclesiological question, how does a healthy church steward its influence for the sake of the gospel? Well, I think we've learned it in 2 John and 3 John. But you have to have both of them. If we only had 2 John to tell us, we may become suspicious of everyone, right? Thank goodness we have 3 John. But if we only had 3 John, we might welcome everyone without discernment, right? Okay, so these two need to go hand in hand. They teach us that discernment and generosity are not competing values. They actually work together. So, conclusions. Healthy churches. Let's talk about that really quick. This is when I look at Scripture, I'm looking at what does the church need to look like? How is the church forming? Where is God sending the church? What is our part in this? So these letters are, in this world, we're seeing that the writers are trying to cultivate the kind of church that can faithfully carry the gospel from one generation to the next. A church that knows truth, a church that loves well, practices wise hospitality, leads with humility, and partners faithfully in the mission of God. And notice each of these letters end with partnership. Gives them greetings. I'm going to come to you. It's relational. He knows them. They know him. I'm going to come to you. I want to tell you so much more. Greet one another. My brothers and sisters greet you, So it's partnership. John, or the writer, doesn't necessarily desire that simply the churches believe only the truth. He desires that the entire congregants become, like in his words, fellow workers for the truth. So we all have a part to play in God's mission. And we can learn that from these churches in Asia Minor. And so a few characteristics of a healthy church: knows the truth, walks in love, exercises discernment, leads with humility, partners in the gospel, and together we become fellow workers for the truth. So thank you all for your patience. I went 13 minutes over, but I enjoyed this study. So if y'all have questions, I'll let the live feed sign off on the live feed for today, but I'm happy to entertain.